going to immediately start talking about Out of the Dawn because I feel like maybe it's a good idea to do that when Into the Mist is fresh in my head. So we open the book with a vague scene about a man being angry that he's dying, and then he's not dead. It's unclear who this is, but there's kind of only two possible answers. It's either Ford or Al. We then enter a new chapter with Mercury. We learn that Mercury has been wallowing in grief after Ford died. She has been having depression naps, as the other characters call it, or depression sleeping, sorry, which feels really, really cavalier about, mental illness, which is a PC Cast classic. But ultimately, the reason why Mercury was borderline catatonic for several days and very unresponsive and uninvolved in her own life is so that we can open this book with Mercury being surprised about how much has been developed and built up in this little camp that they've created. That way, readers can come into it just as fresh as Mercury, which is I don't like that choice from a craft perspective. I feel like there was a better way to do that. The thing is that this is ultimately done so that a lot of the stuff about how the camp has been built up can be exposited to Mercury, where you easily could have just had Mercury going about the motions of her day and interacting with all the things they've set up in their camp and having little reflections in her narration about, oh yeah, on the second day we set this thing up and now we can blah, blah, blah. That would have been fine and would have worked better. There's a lot of discussion made about grief in the wake of Ford's death and stuff like that, but it's weird because I feel like it would have been better served as a conversation about trauma, because they're talking about how Ford's death hit her so much harder than any of the other deaths, even though at this point they're assuming these characters are assuming their entire families have died, all their friends back home have died. And yet, this guy she knew for maybe 2 or 3 days is the thing that sends her spiraling into this, depressive episode and this just overwhelming grief. And that makes sense in the context of the fact that, well, he died in front of you. He was brutally murdered, which is less a thing of grief and more a thing of trauma. All the other deaths were unseen, and so it's a lot easier to compartmentalize that and move on. But this was visceral and horrifying and right in front of her. That's not just grief, that's trauma. Anyway, that's essentially what the purpose of that chapter is just to establish that Mercury was wallowing in grief and the camp was built without her input. She didn't have to do anything. She did not have to dig a latrine, probably because she's PC Cast self-insert. Anyway, they go out to get some more supplies. They find an old RV. For some reason, even though the RV works, they decide not to take it, even though it's okay, but this is a small home on wheels. You can park this at your camp and just have it available as shelter. But they're no, we're leaving behind the old ways. We're not going to drive gas-guzzling vehicles like this anyway, even though they still drive their fucking truck, but okay. They don't even want to take supplies from the RV because it represents the old ways or something. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. Point is, they leave behind useful resources because of some weird bullshit about forging a new path and leaving behind the old ways, and it doesn't make any sense. So they say they're not going to take any supplies from the RV, but then they take a gun and more wine and some random musical instruments, even though they don't know if anyone in their camp can play musical instruments. Sure, we don't need any actual supplies. We're just gonna take these random things. They go out into the hills, which is full of all this colorful clay, and they're gonna use that clay to make bricks because they can't just use regular clay for their bricks. They have to go out to where the colorful clay is and gather that, even though that's dangerous and risks them being caught in the mist or by marauders or having their campsite exposed. But sure, they need the colorful clay so that they can have colorful bricks for their new home. The next chapter, so we're on chapter 4 now, I think. Is that right? Yeah, chapter 4. They use their truck radio that they took from Sim's truck when he died, and they used it to reach out to the lodge, which also had a truck radio. And they established that the lodge is no longer a tenable place to stay, and so a group of about 30 people is headed their way, and they have about a week to prepare, which I think was handled very well. I thought the conversation was conveyed well, especially how it was a bit broken up and unclear, and I like how this gives a reasonable level of stakes and motivation. We have more survivors coming. They'll be here in about a week. We know there's roughly 30 of them. We're not going to be able to communicate with them in the lead up to them getting here, really. So we just need to haul ass and get this camp ready for more people. That's great. I think that makes sense. I do not think it makes sense that in learning that a random group of 30 people is coming, they conclude that surely one of those people will know how to build a windmill, which is one of the ways they're going to generate electricity. I don't know how you concluded that. That seems like a pretty specific set of knowledge and skills, but sure. In this scene where they're thinking about who's already at their camp, and like tallying how many people they're gonna have to take care of now, PC Cast forgot the names of one of the twins, one of the kids that was with them. Originally, in book 1, they were Jaden and Caden. Now they are Hayden and Caden, which is hilarious. After they've had this conversation with the people from the lodge, another person comes over their radio. It's a woman named Ariana. She's asking them for help, but says that she wants to come to them. It's very clearly a trap. And they just kind of cut off the call, and like they don't give her the information she wants. There's more stuff of them being back at their little camp. There's more discussion of what they need to do, how they're going to prepare for these people coming, what's the setup with, like, we learn more about like what the setup in their little cave camp is. And one of the things that they conclude, because of Stella's intuition, is that they need to go to a library to find books on how to build the houses they want to live in, because they know they don't have time for trial and error. Shame that they don't have some form of temporary shelter that they could have to house at least a handful of people. Like, I don't know, an RV. Yes, there's like, there was talk about there's dead people in the RV, so they'd have to remove the dead people. But like, they've dealt with a lot of stuff that was in the possession of dead people. I think at this point, they're okay with that. Anyway, that's that chapter. Chapter 5, they, for some reason, Stella decides they can't bring Karen on this trip with them. Doesn't really make sense. And this is interesting because Stella still like fully trusts and like blindly trusts her intuition, even after Ford died, because she was unsure about her intuition. And so like, it would have been more interesting and given Stella more of a sense of like character and growth if this was a kind of like hold up she had where she's not sure if she can follow her intuition anymore, and how much should she rely on it, and has it been leading them astray, and if she had this kind of crisis of faith in her own intuition. And that could have been something she overcame through the course of the book. And it also would have, meant the characters had to actually make decisions and think things through. But that would mean PC Cast would have to work harder to get her characters where she wants them to go. So she didn't do that. This is basically just a whole chapter of them discussing where they're going, and then describing what the route will be, and then driving that route and having descriptions of the route, and encountering some random short-term obstacles along the way that ultimately don't really matter. The next chapter, they're talking some more about their plans for what they're going to do. They're talking about how does the mist behave? How can we keep it away from our camp? They're like, we need fans to keep it away. They then suggest a windmill. Windmills don't blow air. They are moved by air. So a windmill will not blow away the mist. Imani apparently is an engineer. I think this was mentioned very, very offhand that she did a degree in engineering at the very end of the previous book, but this is used to justify her knowing how to build things, even though engineering is an incredibly broad field, and it does not mean that she knows how to build non-electric fan systems and windmills, and watersheds is another thing they talk about, and like all and the shelters that they're going to have. So it's like, apparently she learned engineering, all of the engineering. They get to this little town, they encounter a dog. The dog is PC Cast's former pet, which sure, fine. I have some thoughts on like the things they're planning. Like, they've discussed at length multiple times the things they're planning to get for their camp and like the little community they're going to build. And they were talking about making bricks from scratch to build their homes. But like, one, there's they know there's convenient, like there's hardware stores and building supply stores at least somewhere nearby, I would think. Why can't they get bricks or lumber from there? There's also lots of buildings that have been damaged from like the earthquakes and stuff. So can they not salvage bricks and lumber from those buildings and use those? Like, it's fine if they have to like use a mix of materials and supplement some of what they're salvaging with these like bricks that they themselves are making, but it's weird that they're like, okay, we need to build enough shelter for 30 people in 1 week. Let's do it all from scratch. It's also weird that they're scouting for all these supplies and trying to salvage things, or kind of, not really in a logical way, but they are trying to scavenge and salvage things, but they don't look for any solar panels anywhere. And I'm like, you are living in a desert. Rather than building a windmill, if you can find intact solar panels and set some of those up, that would be incredibly clutch while you are in a desert. But this thought doesn't occur to them. Next chapter, they meet the owner of this dog. This is our newest character of color, is a black man who is described as, his skin is the ebony of a starless, moonless night, which is some purple prose and just incredibly othering language for a character of color, especially because, again, our white characters are generally not described in terms of their skin color. For some reason, Gemma can't heal this man. He has an injured leg, but Gemma can't heal him, even though in the other, like the previous book, she healed Mercury when Mercury was on the brink of death, but she cannot heal, I think he has like a broken leg or something. Doesn't really make sense. This little town they're in, we learn Amber showed up to collect survivors and bring them to Madras. This doesn't really make any sense. I don't know why they would travel all the way to the middle of nowhere just to collect more women. You don't need that many women to have blood to grow crops, especially because it's not like they have a, huge number of people they're trying to feed. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Editing Rachel, my voice is kind of shot. Bear with me. It is important to remember, in case you have forgotten from the first book, when I say they need the women's blood, it doesn't mean they're killing women to grow food. It means they're collecting menstrual blood from women. That is canonically established what they are doing in Madras. They just need women who are having periods. That's it.
Also, apparently, Amber was hunting Mercury and friends for some reason. Again, doesn't super make sense. I don't know why she's so invested in this specific group of people. Like, yes, they escaped, but it's not like they would be more trouble than they're worth. Like, I guess maybe you could argue she wants to kill them so that they can't tell people the truth about Madras, but I don't know. It's not like there's a wide dissemination of information right now. So they would be pretty slow to spread word. I don't know. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Anyway, they had gone to this. They had gotten to the library in this small town. That's where they found this man. His name is Marcus. The next chapter, they're getting ready to leave. The truck bed is full of books. This is a very small library. I don't know how they got so many books from this small library and how they were able to find books on really, really specific things. Like, they find medical reference books in this tiny library in this podunk town. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is a stretch. They, for some reason, take a Jeep, even though they wouldn't take the RV because they're leaving the old ways behind, but they can take the Jeep and it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, when they're on their way back towards their camp, they come across another man. He is a snakebite victim. Mercury can somehow tell that he is exactly 21 when she looks at him. And we're kind of immediately presented as if this guy is going to be some kind of love interest to Gemma. Gemma is 16, and again, he's 21. So that's pretty icky, but also a thing PC Cass does in her books. This kid is very scared and he's injured, and he's concerned because none of them have antivenin. So he's like, how are you, like, I'm going to die, how are you going to heal me? And Mercury yells at him. Gemma heals him. The next chapter, there's this interesting juxtaposition. This guy's name is Chad. There's this interesting juxtaposition between Chad and Gemma, where like Gemma just healed him and she's like kind of like weak and out of it because it like takes a lot out of her to heal. And the other characters offer her help and she declines, but Chad immediately asks for water, and like it's kind of presented as if we're supposed to look down on him and like see him as needy and annoying, but it's like he did just almost die. So like from the knowledge the characters have of this kid, it doesn't make sense for them to be so antagonistic towards him, but they're antagonistic towards him because the author knows what is actually going on with this character and like who he really is. There's more travel. They're on their way back to camp. On the way, they see some wild goats and they are convinced that they can just catch wild goats and their babies. They don't do that in this moment, but that is a pretty interesting, like this isn't like they found an abandoned farm and there were tame goats there and they were like, hey, why don't we take these goats who are like not being cared for anymore? No, these are wild goats that they're like, we can totally just wrangle some wild goats. And I'm like, you're gonna get fucking charged and stabbed. The next chapter, they're having a meal together in their camp. Somehow they foraged wild vegetables in high desert. I'm not super clear on what that was. It's not described as if they're like cactus plants. They just call them vegetables. Marcus is given codeine or hydrocodone. The book is inconsistent about which it is, because of his like broken leg or whatever. But he's also given weed, which is like not, you probably shouldn't mix those, dude. But as far as the author is concerned, weed is safe and perfect, and you never need to be concerned about who is having weed and in what context they're having it and what things they're mixing it with. So it's fine. He can have weed with his narcotics. Don't worry about it. We, again, have this kind of contradictory presentation of Chad against other characters. Marcus is examining the camping and asking questions about it, and we're supposed to see this as good. But when Chad does the same thing, he's being arrogant and entitled, and like it just doesn't make sense. There's uncomfortable dialogue. I'm going over too many details again, but I do want to highlight this. There's uncomfortable dialogue between Imani and Marcus because, of course, they are the two black characters remaining in this book, so they have to be black, like they have to behave as black caricatures with each other. So at one point, Marcus says, "Well done, Queen," when I think it's in reference to how Imani is the like engineer behind the plans to build the shelters. And then there's also a bit where it describes it like describing a gesture towards her as he bowed his head in acknowledgement of her black girl magic, which is just like, someone take the phrase black girl magic away from PC Cast because she keeps using it in uncomfortable or just incorrect ways. We learn more about what's going on with Chad, and specifically that he left behind his grandmother. He left his town trying to see if, he said he was like looking for a cottage they used to have or something, and trying to find a safe place for them to live because the town they were in had gotten overtaken by marauders or something. And this is presented as like, you know, oh, he's so terrible, how could he do that? But again, it's similar to the situation with Gemma's mom, where I'm like, I kind of see this as like a person being presented with an impossible choice. He can stay behind in the town that's being overtaken by a gang of marauders and probably be murdered, or he can try and fight off a gang of marauders seemingly by himself to protect his grandmother, in which case, again, he's probably going to be murdered. Or he can try and travel with his grandmother, but the only vehicle he had was a motorcycle, which would not be ideal for transporting a probably frail older woman over incredibly rough terrain that has been broken up by earthquakes. And also, if he does go with her on this motorcycle, it's not like they're going to be in a position to outrun the marauders if the marauders decide to follow them. And so he's kind of in this like the way he presents the story is that he was going to go scope out shelter and then come back. And he didn't want to take as I recall, he didn't want to take his grandmother with him and have it potentially be for nothing. I just think it's one of those moments where these characters are being presented in really, really like black and white terms, and there's no room for nuance or empathy or like, that was a bad choice, but I do understand why like, you didn't really have any good choices. But, you know, he's clearly being set up as an antagonist. The author knows he's an antagonist, and so the characters consistently respond to him as if he's an antagonist, which is, from a craft's perspective, not great. For me as a reader, I would feel more tension even if it was a mixed reaction from the group. If maybe Stella was really suspicious of him and Mercury was really suspicious of him, but Amani as a mother is like, that's such a different, like, because he's only 21, like, compared to them, he's a child. And, you know, if Imani and Gemma were sympathetic to him, and like, right, like, if we could have a bit of a mixed bag of reactions, then that would create more tension in the dynamic. But the only one who's kind of sympathetic to him is Gemma, and it's just because she has a crush on him, so her opinion is pretty heavily dismissed. The characters have more discussion about their plans for developing their camp. This goes on for a couple pages. They also suddenly come to the revelation that their abilities are magic, and this is supposed to be a dramatic reveal. And I'm like, yeah, one of you, at least two of you are psychic, and the other one can see spirits. So that, I don't know what else you would call that. Like, the only one who has some reasonable cause to not refer to her abilities as magic is Mercury, because they are very much based in her physical body. But, like, very clearly magic is involved here. Your blood grows plants. Like, what are we talking about? Anyway, the rest of the chapter is just them talking about stuff. Next chapter, Mercury goes to sleep and then has one of the most unerotic sex dreams I have ever read. It is with, you know, Ford is entering her dreams. In addition to having horns, he now has fur. So one of the only men of color in this book is part animal. We will get to that later. The next chapter, we return to our unknown narrator from the beginning, and we learn that it is Al. PC Cast seems to have attempted a red herring, but it's so incredibly short-lived as to be kind of pointless. Al he ends up running into Amber and Mayor Cruz as they're on their journey. And of course, as an evil man, he immediately gets aroused by the sight of an attractive woman. For some reason, the mayor, like the mayor is part of this scavenging mission. I don't know why she would go out to do this. Like, she has lots of people to do dirty work for her. I don't know why she would go out to do this. We're also supposed to get the impression that she's very calculated and calculated and cunning. But for some reason, she's wearing stilettos to traverse terrain that has been absolutely wrecked by earthquakes, which just makes her seem frivolous and ridiculous. We learn about, so Al we thought was dead, and he did kind of die, but then he didn't die, and now he also has magic, and his magic, of course, is controlling leeches, because he's evil, and that's an evil creature, and also he can control shadows, and he summons small animals to him to be killed by leeches. Sure. We also learn that Eva's blood for some reason kills plants. I don't know why. The magic system in this world is not well thought out or explained. So we're just kind of supposed to take it as is given and not examine it too much. Anyway, the next morning, Mercury wakes up after having her weird erotic dream. Gemma and Chad are openly flirting. No one is concerned about the age gap in the relationship. They just don't like Chad. Chad, as an antagonist, seems to be developing a drug problem in relation to using painkillers for the pain of having almost died of a snake bite. They're out somewhere in their little camp area. There's like a pond or something nearby. And they're all kind of, like, a bunch of them are gathered there. They have a fishing rod set out. The children are playing the instruments that they got. There's like drums and a flute, and it's described as very lovely, but like none of these kids have ever played these instruments before. So I'm like, that realistically, that would just sound awful. There's also this weird moment where once again, a character of color is being used, being exposed to microaggressions as a means of establishing that we shouldn't like a certain character. And specifically, this is being done in a context where we already know we're not supposed to like this character. Chad is surprised when he learns that Marcus was not just the cook of a cafe in town, but the owner. And this is notable not only because it's, we're being told to dislike Chad because of microaggressions against a person of color, completely unnecessarily because we've already been thoroughly shown that we shouldn't like Chad. But it's also interesting because earlier, in one of the previous chapters, Gemma had made a comment about Marcus being the cook, and he was totally fine with it. And Marcus himself, even though he is the owner of the cafe, he says he's just a cook. So it's like weird that we're supposed to be mad at Chad for saying that. Like, it doesn't make sense. And again, it's just being done to tell us we shouldn't like Chad when we already know we shouldn't like Chad. The next chapter, they go up to, like, they have this cliffside oasis, like, up the hill. They carry some supplies up there. There's already a garden started there. And we learn that the oasis hadn't been there before. Imani willed it into existence. Which, how? I guess that's a thing she can do now. This isn't really explained or justified. She just can do this. But it also completely removes any real tension from the survivalist aspect of the story, because, like, why would I ever worry about these characters being provided for if they can do things like will an oasis into existence in the high desert? I just don't feel like I have any reason to be concerned. We also, again, have the term black girl magic used incorrectly in relation to this. The next chapter is more of, the mayor's name is Eva Cruz. And we see more of Eva and Al interacting, and she's an evil, sexy woman, and he's an evil, racist man. And that's kind of all they do. They do end up doing something in this chapter. They go out to re-expose Eva to the mist to see if she will get powers from it, and she does get powers from it. She can smell things really well, and she can summon mosquitoes. So our two evil characters can summon, like, bug type creatures that are considered gross and evil and feed on blood. Great. This, of course, then escalates into Eva and Al having sex, because evil people have meaningless sex based purely in lust. We also get some narration from Al where he's thinking about Eva and how he wants to control her. And it's this really, really blunt idea about, like, how manipulation and psychological abuse works, which, like, just fucking pissed me off when I read it, because, like, part of what he says is that Eva is too confident and smart to be manipulated like that. And I'm like, that's not how psychological abuse works, actually. Again, this is supposed to be a feminist apocalypse, but it doesn't understand how women get abused. And so it really, really fails in examining, like, the actual difficulties women face in the real world. And yeah, it just really pissed me off.
Sorry, it's editing Rachel with no voice again. I have to touch on this more because I really didn't dig into this. The idea that psychological and emotional abuse, which is what control manipulation is, the idea that those types of abuse only happens to women who are insecure or unintelligent, and that if you're confident and educated enough, you'll never be a victim of this abuse, just isn't true. The problem with psychological abuse is that it is often very subtle, it is often very persuasive, and it operates in underhanded ways. Typically, an abuser is not going to come out full throttle telling you, you can't do this, you can't dress like that, you can't go here, because most people that isn't going to work on. So abusers, or like psychologically abusive people, they will start with subtle things, and they will usually start with manipulative tactics that actually feel very positive, like love bombing. So the idea that someone like Eva is simply too intelligent and confident to get roped into an abusive relationship, like, that's just not how abuse works. And that's a really, really harmful misconception for PC Cast to reinforce in this text, especially because it is presented as a feminist text. It's about empowering women, it's about celebrating women's strength, and then presenting women who get abused as simply women who are weak. I cannot overstate how incredibly harmful that is.
Oh, also completely unnecessarily, They're talking about like the group of teachers throughout this chapter, and every time they talk about Ford, they use racist slurs against him, and they call him Mexican. And once again, this is just a situation of completely needless microaggressions and outright aggressions against a character of color simply to establish that the villains are villains. But it's like, we already knew that. You did not have to put that in here. You're just like wildly flippantly including racist shit in your book for the sake of being like, racists are bad people. And it's like, I got that. You're not, this doesn't add anything. The next chapter, some of them go out on another supply run. Gemma is really fixated on going out to the cliffs to collect more colorful clay because they can't have bricks that are a boring color. And this is like a very risky thing to do, but like everybody's kind of fine with it. I don't know. It's stupid. They end up doing a supply run. They finally think to check a lumber store. It just didn't occur to them to do that until they saw a lumber store. These are supposed to be smart characters. Anyway, this chapter is just 9 pages of talking and shopping. And by shopping, I mean just scavenging stuff. And it's real boring. The next chapter, well, actually, no, the end of the chapter, Imani runs off and they're worried about her and they think she's gone. But then the next chapter, immediately they're like, oh, there's Imani, and it's fine. We don't have to worry about anything. Imani found some kittens that had leeches on them because Al was trying to use leeches to kill a baby kitten for some reason. Hi, Editing Rachel here. I know in the first video I talked a bit about how Imani has basically 2 defining character traits, and that is black woman and mom. Her rescuing these kittens does in fact fall under the category of being mom. Kittens are babies, and as a mom, she has to protect and nurture babies. So once again, her role in the story, including her like situations where she endangers herself to rescue these kittens, which I talk about in a bit. She is doing that because her job is just to be a mom. That's her role in the book. Anyway, because she ran off to go help these kittens, they end up getting caught in the path of mist, and Mercury gets out, but Imani doesn't, and Imani gets re-exposed to the mist. This becomes important later. The next chapter is just more talking about like supplies and stuff. There is acknowledgement about the age gap between Gemma and Chad, but it's justified by saying that girls are more mature than boys, which is fucking gross, and also like a literal thing used to groom young girls. So like, maybe don't fucking do that. What the fuck? Stella gets a bad feeling about Chad, but Mercury dismisses it as like, oh, you probably just have a bad feeling because he's gonna break her heart. And it's like, why, like, when these characters have previously so blindly trusted Stella's intuition, it doesn't make sense when they then dismiss it. And it's again, none of these decisions follow like logic in terms of the characters' personalities or experiences or motives. It's just what the author needs them to do. Mercury goes out to bathe. She realizes that where she's bathing is near Ford's grave. So she doesn't make like a conscious decision to visit Ford's grave. She just kind of accidentally does it, which is just such a fucking choice. Like, let your characters choose to do things. Anyway, she has another like dream or vision or whatever about Ford, and like still does not realize that he's real, even though he keeps leaving physical traces. She also refers to him as not a man. Again, this is one of our only people of color in the book, and he is actively not a human anymore. These are choices being made. They're preparing for this little ritual because they want to celebrate like the fact that they put in their garden, they created this oasis. We know that Karen is getting better and becoming a better person because she has lost weight and looks younger. And also, she wants to bless the land like a pagan rather than using her own Christian practices. That's how we know she's a good Christian, is because she bows to paganism. Again, the religious commentary in this series is just so not good. It's just... Anyway, this chapter is just people sitting around talking. The only thing we really learn is that since being exposed to the mist again, Imani can now talk to plants. That's the only actual plot relevant thing established. We get another chapter from Eva and Al. Eva is fear-mongering the populace. It's just a chapter of Eva being evil and being sexy evil, so she uses sex to control men. And also she's evil because she is promiscuous and goes commando. So Eva's evil and sexy. That's the chapter. The next chapter, the characters are actually preparing for the ritual to, celebrate their garden. I think most of the chapter is just them getting dressed and putting on body paint. The next chapter is them doing their ritual. There's a big deal made about Chad not wanting to have his face painted, even though, he doesn't have to get his face painted, and particularly because this is being done for a pagan ritual, maybe he's just not comfortable partaking in a ritual worship of something that he doesn't follow. It's just more stuff of PC Cast often puts so much effort into villainizing characters, but she doesn't vilify them in ways that make sense. It's just that they're bad because they don't want to do the things that her good characters want to do, and that doesn't make any sense. So sorry, the ritual still hasn't happened. This is still just a chapter of them getting dressed and getting face paint on. Maybe the previous chapter was them discussing getting their face paint on? Hold on. Okay, I don't know. I got mixed up with the last chapter. Whatever. They get dressed and put face paint on. They decide where they're going to plant their crops, and then they dance and play music, and it's all improvised, but it's all beautiful, and it all flows together, even though sure, PC Cast classic, you don't choreograph or rehearse any kind of dance or ritual. It just happens, and it works perfectly. This entire chapter was just dedicated to them planting seeds and dancing. The next chapter is them, talking about everything that they just did at their ritual. That's the majority of this chapter, and then we get a scene break, and then start of the next page, bam, rape scene. I'm going to try to be really, really brief when I talk about this, because this made me really, really fucking angry when I read it. This is why Chad is in this book. Chad is in this book to rape Gemma. That is the culmination of his villainy. Now, the thing with this choice is that ultimately, what villainous thing Chad actually wanted to do that would have had an impact on the group without needing to have a gratuitous rape subplot that comes to nothing. He planned to steal a vehicle and a bunch of supplies. That on its own would have been a perfectly fine villainous subplot. It would have fit with him being established as very selfish. It would have been followed on from him abandoning his grandmother, just looking out for himself. It would have offered an opportunity for the characters to kind of flex and show off their powers, especially Mercury with her speed and marksmanship. She could have chased him and shot out his tires or something. It could have been something where it still made it clear that yes, they shouldn't have trusted Chad, and it did come to consequence, but the actual rape in the book is completely gratuitous, and it's just we pick up after it has happened. And so initially I thought oh, okay, we're just seeing the aftermath of it. We're not actually going to see the scene. But then in dialogue for I think it's 2 pages, Gemma describes in vivid detail everything he did to her and exactly how it played out. And it's so wildly unnecessary. And I need to note that this book does not have trigger warnings. There are no trigger warnings included anywhere in this text. And it is, again, marketed as a feminist apocalypse. I just want to jump in really quick and acknowledge that, yes, PCcast does say on social media and in interviews that this isn't feminist. It's being marketed as feminist by publishers, but she didn't label it as feminist. Just because it has women being powerful and independent doesn't mean it's a feminist manifesto. But in the discussion questions to Into the Mist, which the way they are phrased sounds like she wrote the discussion questions, because it refers to I and has comments about the writing process, she refers to the text as feminist. So I am going by that, what is actually put in writing in this series, in the author's voice, calling it feminist. So just for clarification. Why does our feminist apocalypse have a gratuitous rape scene that's just there for shock value? This goes on for a few chapters of the, aftermath of the rape happens, and they're tending to Gemma and making sure she's okay. And then they chase down Chad. And then they eventually, catch Chad and bring him, back to the campsite and, basically have a trial for him. They basically are just did you rape her? And he's yeah. And then I think Mercury throws him off a cliff, and that's it. There's this weird bit where I can't remember who says it to Gemma, but one of the characters I have noted saying that being a rape survivor is a badge of honor is, like, I think I get what it's going for. Like, you should be proud of yourself for surviving and like getting to safety, but calling it an honor is like incredibly fucked up. Like, that's not the right phrase to use. Anyway, that's the conclusion of Chad. He randomly decides to rape Gemma and then is thrown off a cliff. And like, sure, yes, I'm not mad about him being thrown off a cliff, but I think the way this was handled, it felt incredibly gratuitous, and nothing ultimately comes of it. This doesn't matter to Gemma's character, and it doesn't really change the group, because this happens right before the survivors from the lodge show up. So it's not like this now creates this tension where they are afraid to welcome strange men into the camp because of what happened. And like Gemma in particular being afraid of strange men entering the camp. That doesn't happen. It doesn't change. Like, they don't turn into a bit of a Madras situation where they're trying to have a checkpoint and screen people. Nothing really happens from it. It's just Gemma is kind of sad and a little nervous in a couple scenes, but like ultimately nothing really happens. And you could have cut that entire detail from the book and just had it be about Chad stealing supplies, and it would have been the same. Nothing narratively or thematically would have changed. So I really don't like that. That is one of the things that made me the angriest reading this book. And it's again one of those situations where PC Cast really, really wants to introduce incredibly heavy, difficult, triggering topics into her books, but she doesn't handle them with the gravity and care that she should. And especially, like, specifically in this case, this should matter to the narrative and to the characters and to the world they're creating, and it just doesn't. There's some lip service paid to the idea of, you know, we are going to forge a society where we don't hurt our own and there are dire consequences to hurting people. But like, you don't have to have a rape subplot for that to be the conclusion they come to. Anyway, the group from the lodge finally arrives. We learned some things that have happened with the group. Hillary has now displayed a healing ability. Hillary is present for like one paragraph, and then it's just Jenny and Stella and Mercury talking, and Jenny talks about Hillary's power for her. Hillary doesn't get to introduce her own powers, which is like, in a book where queer characters have had such little presence and have largely been killed off, it feels bad that a queer character doesn't get to have enough agency in the story to even talk about what her new abilities are. But whatever, Hillary is a healer, but she's a healer of the mind. She can heal mental ailments. It's basically just introducing all of the newcomers to the camp. Some people died on the road. This is like the one moment that the thing with Chad kind of attempts to matter, where Mercury basically tells the group that like she and her friends are the law here, and if they don't follow their rules then they will meet consequences, and then shows them Chad's dead body, which is pretty fucking extreme, but ultimately it doesn't matter. Anyway, then we have some more just discussion between characters as they've arrived. Again, there's just lots of characters talking in this book. It's interesting, I did note that it's interesting that Hillary, as a doctor or a naturopath, has lesser healing abilities than Gemma, who has first aid training, even though the powers bestowed by the mist are supposed to be a reflection of like skills or like kind of natural knacks that the characters already had. And like, whatever misgivings I have of Hillary being called a doctor as a naturopath without a medical degree, as far as the text is concerned, she is effectively a doctor. She administers medicine. She tends to the wounded. Why is her healing ability of the mind? I know why it's of the mind. It's because Hillary is actually PC Cast's like therapist or something. She talked about that when talking about this book once. So it's because of who the character is actually based on. But that, like, when you're reading the book without that information, it doesn't make any sense. And the book should make sense outside of, you know, PC Cast's personal life. The first mention that we ever get of trans and non-binary people in this book, because during this conversation, They go over a few different topics and they eventually land on Hillary being concerned about what is happening to her community. And the other characters are like, what community? And she says, the LGBTQIA plus community, which is not how any queer person I know would ever refer to our community in casual conversation. You don't pull out that giant fucking acronym. You just say queer. Hillary is concerned because as the only gay person in the book, she's the only person who could possibly know that trans people exist. And so she's wondering if trans or non-binary people are okay. So Hillary, a cis woman, is worried about the trans and non-binary people. And Stella, another cis woman, is like, my psychic powers told me they're fine because the mist actually goes by spirit, not biology. Now here's where I come to a problem, because the entirety of the first book, and, you know, up to like the 75% mark of this book, the mist very clearly attacks some kind of biological marker. It killed an unborn baby because it would have been assigned male at birth. So I don't know how PC Cast thinks gender works. And this gets particularly complicated when you consider culturally specific concepts of gender. Certainly some people and some cultures would conceive of gender as a facet of the spirit. Some other people see gender as not a choice, but a culmination of who they are. Like some people live a portion of their life as one gender and then come to some realization about themselves and live as a different gender. And they don't always see that as, oh, I realized who I was all along. Sometimes it is seen as I became someone else. And that's totally valid. Notably, there are people who are gender fluid and their gender fluctuates, sometimes from moment to moment or day to day, sometimes over months, sometimes over many years. And I'm curious about how the mist responds to that concept of gender. I'm also curious how the mist responds to two-spirit identities, because the concept of two-spirit, it's not specifically a gender thing. It's like it's a post-colonial term in a variety of, I think specifically North American Indigenous communities. I don't think it applies to South American, but a lot of queer Indigenous peoples refer to themselves as two-spirit because there is a concept of like the reason you say two-spirit is because, say for example, and I'm not going to explain this perfectly because I do know it a little bit, but I myself am not Indigenous, so bear with me. But the gist of the concept is that, say a woman is a lesbian, or like the term we would use is lesbian, but as an Indigenous woman, she calls herself two-spirit because being queer means she has some of the spirit of male and female in her, and that is why she has this difference. And so in that cultural conception of queerness, would one not say that her spirit is a little bit male? And if the mist goes by spirit, and like the same could be true of an Indigenous gay man or bi man or ace man, or right? Editing Rachel, because I feel like I didn't explain myself super clearly here. If the mist says that a two-spirit woman, who in our Western colonial language, who we would refer to as a lesbian, if her spirit is part male, part female, but the mist allows her to survive because of the femaleness of her spirit, then by that same logic, a two-spirit man, who in our language would be referred to as a gay man, should also be spared by the mist because of the femaleness in his spirit, because under this cultural understanding of queerness, he has a partially female spirit. I just don't think I explained that very well, so I wanted to jump in and add that. So like when we get into calling it spirit, it gets really messy. And this is true even of, white queer people. Certainly there are, very, very butch lesbians who are more comfortable with male identifiers and male designations, but do also still consider themselves a woman. I, as a bisexual woman, feel like I have a different relationship with gender than probably a straight woman. There's people who are what's called gender apathetic, where they're like, yeah, sure, you called me a woman and that seems roughly accurate, but it doesn't really matter to me. But this is a complicated concept and I'm going on a whole tangent, but like gender apathy is not the same as being agender. It's not the same as being non-binary. It's specifically like gender just does not matter. I'm not explaining it well, but essentially there's a lot of different ways of conceiving of gender, and especially of conceiving how one's gender manifests as a facet of like your essence or your spirit. And so trying to wave away all concern for trans and non-binary people by saying, oh, it affects spirit, doesn't actually work, particularly because it only addresses then like it only addresses trans women, and it doesn't even fully address non-binary people, because it's like, okay, what about a big 6-foot tall person with a beard who's like super muscular, who's into very masculine hobbies, who is comfortable being addressed as sir, but uses he, they pronouns and considers themselves non-binary? Does the mist spare that person who would conventionally be conceived as very masculine and even misgendered as a man? Or is this an example of a lot of people, when they hear non-binary, they think woman light, because it's not what non-binary is? What about demi-boys? What about, right? Like, where's the line? At what point does the mist go, that's a man, and kill them if it's going by spirit? But also, if it's going by spirit, then why does it kill, like, why is it just killing based on gender? Why, and also I don't know if I fully got into this, but like, what happened to trans men? Did trans men die too? Because that's also kind of fucked up, because like saying that all men are evil, yes, also trans men, is not the empowering inclusion you think it is. But also, like, if it goes by spirit, then why didn't the mist kill Eva, but it did kill Sim? Like, Sim was a very, very kind man, and he died pretty much immediately. But Eva has been exposed to the mist multiple times and is clearly very evil, but didn't die. So if the mist is going by someone's spirit, why isn't it going by their spirit in terms of, you know, are they malevolent? Like, it just, the second this concept was introduced, it entirely destroyed the world building and made the entire premise fall apart. And also just revealed that PCcast doesn't understand how incredibly complicated gender is. And anyway, I just think it is a choice that a series about a gender side that involves multiple scenes of characters soapboxing about how women are better than men, and, you know, women versus men and gender in that sense, has less than a page of dialogue acknowledging the existence of trans and non-binary people and resolving any concern for them within this apocalypse. I would have rathered that trans and non-binary people be mentioned offhand at some point in the first book and just be left as a question. Like, I would have, like, because I would be like, okay, the book is acknowledging that trans and non-binary people exist. I'm not expecting a perfect solution to that question. I just want their existence to be acknowledged in what is otherwise an incredibly biologically essentialist narrative. If you can believe it, I'm not done ranting about how this book handled the question of transness and non-binary people and gender in regards to how the mist affects people, because this scene doesn't even touch on the concept of intersex conditions. And I know conceptually the scene is saying, well, intersex conditions can't matter because biology doesn't actually matter to the mist, it's spirit. So if an intersex person is like, I am a woman, then the mist won't care if they have internal testes because they're a woman, their spirit is that of a woman, so they'll survive. But I just think it's really, really notable that, again, in a book that introduced this mist as a biological weapon targeting some sort of biological marker, and that has gender as such a core focus of the book, that at no point, and that has multiple, I know I talked about this in the previous video, but has multiple characters who are science teachers who know about biology and shit, and has doctors, Gemma, and a naturopath, but ostensibly people who are medically knowledgeable. Not a single one of them ever even hints at the notion that sex is not a biologically discrete category. We still haven't had that conversation, and we never will. It's never acknowledged. PC Cast, who brags about how she's studied biology and she's really good at science, doesn't seem to know what intersex conditions are. For context, I learned about intersex conditions in 9th grade at my very poor PEI high school. Not high school, because 9th grade was middle school where I lived.
But point being, I learned about this in not a great education system. So what is university educated biology minor, daughter of a biology teacher, PC cast's excuse?
I'm like 2/3 of the way through editing Out of the Dawn, and I don't know exactly where this clip is going to go, but I just keep thinking about this series and how it handles the topic of gender and especially transness. And I just have so many thoughts, and I know I've already talked a lot about it, but if you can believe it, I still have more to say. So I think I've kind of touched on this before, the idea that PC Cast has said in different interviews and stuff that the reason why the conversation about trans people and how they're affected by the mist didn't come up in the first book is because there wasn't a space for this conversation. This is a book about a bunch of, high school teachers navigating the apocalypse. It's not a treatise on trans identity, yada, yada, yada.
Hillary said, I want to know what it's doing to my community. Mm-hmm. And then they discuss, she's like, is it biologically based? Mm-hmm. So how about our trans sisters? Are they alive? Are they dead? What's happening? Yeah. And I don't think this is giving away too much to talk about this. And what Stella immediately says, Stella's our seer. She just knows things. And she says, yes, they're fine. She said, it's spirit. She said, it's spirit. Oh. It's not.
You have answered the question we had in our discussion. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I already knew that in book 1. I already knew that. Right. And my editor and I discussed if I should put it in book 1. But then after I wrote it, and you know how the action is like boom, 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 boom. Yeah. It's going like that. And there are a group of teachers from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I don't have any trans women or trans men even in the group. Mm-hmm. And they're like running around trying to survive. So to input a big discussion about what it's doing to the LGBTQ plus communities would have been, I felt like, and my editor agreed with me, that it would have been very forced and very like fake and very like, well, like, PC Cast had to put that in there because, she forced that. And no, I want it to be, it's just like when I have any character who is anywhere, with the community, it's not like, ooh, I had a gay character. No, it's like, oh, that's who this character is.
And I've already talked about how that's bullshit because as an author, I think I've talked about this, as an author, you are always making a decision about what you do or do not include in your story. And so PC Cast at any point has the power to structure her story in such a way that an opportunity to acknowledge the question of what happens to trans people in the mist, like she has the power to make that fit into her story. And I can even think of an exact place where this could fit. There's a part in Into the Mist where Mercury is reflecting on like all of the people she may have lost to the mist. Namely, she lists, like, I read out the list of names in my Into the Mist video. She lists like 12 of her best friends that she's like, I'm probably never going to see them again. If they're even alive, like they've probably died, yada, yada, yada. And that would have been a perfect place for her to think about other people as well. So she lists all her friends. Maybe she then thinks about her family. Maybe then she has a moment of like, and what about her neighbor Ivy, who was so excited to start hormones last fall? Would the mist see her as woman enough to survive? What does the mist even consider a woman? How is that defined in how the mist targets people? That's it. That would have been enough. For me, obviously, ideally, you would actually fit a trans character somewhere into this story. There's a lot of characters. There's space to have a trans character show up somewhere. But PC Cast chose not to do that. And I can even think of specific contexts where including a trans character would have really strengthened or like added something significant to the narrative. Not only because this book is a book that is ultimately about gender, it has a gender side at the center, and it's about women seizing power and taking over and making the world better than it was under men, which oversimplifies how patriarchal capitalistic power structures work, but we'd be here for hours if I try to unpack that. So like, not only would, say, the camp, including a trans woman, be really powerful and really emphasize that message about women seizing their power, but also in Madras, there could have been this really sinister, uncomfortable narrative where, in addition to discovering that they are basically, they test all the women's blood, and any woman who has blood that can grow plants isn't allowed to leave, and like women are required to use menstrual cups so their blood can be collected, and et cetera, et cetera. In addition to that, there could have also been a process of, maybe Madras had like one or two trans men, or maybe some trans men have escaped the apocalypse and sought refuge in Madras, and in that process are discovered to have this blood that grows plants. And maybe that means that they not only are not allowed to leave Madras, but are being misgendered and stripped of anything that allows them to, present themselves as male, and they're treated even worse than the cis women. And like, there could have been this whole narrative added to it, and it would have emphasized the corruption of Madras, and including the narrative of like Christianity evil. It could have fit in with that as well, in a narrative of religious intolerance. And like, there could have been a parallel to like conversion therapy. Like, you could have done so much by not only just acknowledging that trans people exist somewhere in the narrative in the context of this gendercidal mist, but transness could have been used to emphasize the messages of the story. Not only women seizing their power, and part of that maybe being trans women seizing and owning their transness and not letting them be defined by cisnormative perceptions of gender and expectations of who they should be, but also trans men being subjugated and misgendered. And like, there's so much that could have been done, and like, it would have dealt with the themes of religious intolerance and patriarchy, and like, it's truly such a missed opportunity. And it really, really shows how PC Cast, I'm trying to be careful about how I word this, PC Cast comes across as so assured of her own perspectives and her own craft that she doesn't seem to really take on board these kinds of criticisms. When she heard the criticism of Into the Mist not including trans people, she didn't go, oh, that was an oversight, I should probably find space for that in Out of the Dawn, like real space for that in Out of the Dawn. No, instead she's like, oh, okay, people are really, really upset that I didn't answer the question about transness in Into the Mist, so I will have a single, like, not even page-long conversation where I resolve it in one word. It's spirit, there, fixed, and move on, never address it again. And that, like, that shows that she's not understanding what the problem is. And to me, it's bad allyship. I think I've rambled enough about this. I could continue talking about it, because I could continue coming up with ways in which transness could have just actually been included in the story. But I've talked enough. Anyway, that was the other really major thing that pissed me off in this book. The only other thing of importance that happens in this chapter is one of the men who came with the group decides to leave, and they give him some supplies. We have another chapter. Part of the chapter is from Alan Eva's perspective. They've done basically nothing in this entire book. It's 70% of the way into the book, and they have not done anything. We have a scene where some of the characters are talking. Mercury and Stella decide to go on another supply run. Gemma is feeling kind of bored and restless. We learn that Keith died. That was the man who left at the end of the previous chapter, so he's just immediately dead. That was very pointless. We get some narration from Gemma's perspective. She decides to wander off and try to capture goats. Somehow she doesn't get immediately murdered trying to feed wild goats. But instead they don't, she's with Georgie, who's the little girl. They don't get killed, but they do get caught by the villains and they are kidnapped. Well, the villains attempt to kidnap them. Then the next chapter opens with the villains attempting to kidnap them. These kids somehow outrun and overpower them with like a stick, but they do eventually catch Georgie. Gemma falls off a cliff into a ravine. Anyway, this raises a question about when Stella and Mercury decided to go off to do a supply run and leave Gemma behind. Stella didn't get any kind of gut feeling about this decision. So Stella's power continues to not make any sense. The next chapter, we have Stella and Mercury on their other supply run. While they're on the supply run, Al tries to ambush them. Like, he's in a vehicle, they're in a vehicle. Now Ford, a man of color who died protecting a white woman, comes to said woman's rescue again, in the same place where he died trying to protect her the first time. Everything Ford does is about Mercury, and he doesn't have any of his own goals or motives. Also, we now learn that Ford can turn into other animals. He turns into an eagle to attack Al. It's also an interesting choice that like Mercury is armed and is a very good shot, but she instead gets saved by a man in this feminist apocalypse. Also, Ford, as a man of color, is a naked, muscular animal man just running around in the wilderness. So that was a choice that was made. We have another chapter from Eva and Ford's perspective. Eva is evil because she's raiding a town for supplies and drinking white wine, even though that is exactly what the main characters have been doing continuously. Also, they continue to say racist slurs about Ford. We're supposed to be worried that that Al and Eva are going to use Georgie. They're going to release Georgie, who they captured, and then kind of follow the path she takes to find their way to camp. And then like they'll know where the teachers they want to kill are. And we're supposed to be really scared about this. But they've done absolutely nothing so far. All they've done is kill some small animals, and they have 3 men with them with guns. But the camp has Marcus, who we learned earlier in the book is ex-military. It has Mercury, who has super strength, super speed, and is a like magically enhanced marksman. We have Stella, who is psychic and can sense danger coming. Ford keeps showing up as a super strength, shape-shifting goat man, and they're on top of a cliff, and there's 24 other people who can potentially help them with firearms or setting up defenses. So I'm not really sure why I'm supposed to be worried about 5 completely incompetent idiots trying to find their camp. Anyway, the next chapter, Stella and Mercury arrive back at camp. They immediately deduce where Gemma and Georgie would have gone. Once again, Ford saves the day. He saves Gemma. So this man of color is just, all he does in this book is save white women. And once again, he's doing this instead of one of the other women saving the day. Again, feminist apocalypse. But like, Mercury didn't save herself. Gemma didn't save herself. This is where Hillary's magic starts to matter, because Gemma like fell, and I think she's like in a coma basically because of her injury. And Hillary has to re-expose herself to the mist to strengthen her magic so that she can heal Gemma enough so that Gemma can heal herself, which is presented as very dramatic, but also Stella is like, I can tell that this will be fine, and so I'm not worried at all. But also in this scene when Hillary is talking about healing, Hillary can heal a traumatic brain injury because she knows she can heal grief and anxiety, which are different, but okay. But also in talking about people she has healed, she talked about how if she can't reach someone's mind, she can't save them. And so there were people back at the lodge who went catatonic from the trauma and grief of, the apocalypse. And so They chose to withdraw and therefore chose to die, which is not how trauma works and is just more ableism in this series. And then Ford then goes and finds Georgie, and he warns everyone about Al. So Ford is basically doing everything of relevance in this book, which again, it is a man of color constantly saving white women, and primarily white women. Imani's in there too. But also, it just means, like, this is supposed to be a feminist book. Why aren't the women doing anything? Why are these super-powered women doing nothing? The shock twist of the end of this chapter is that the revelation of what Imani's prophecy was at the end of the previous book is that Al is the destroyer. Not remotely shocking. Al shows up and there's a bit of a fight, except his leeches are useless because of course they are. They're leeches and Ford can fly. So that doesn't end up coming to much of anything. But then we have dialogue from Ford where he says, "In this scene, I feel more truly me than I have ever before, more comfortable within my skin than before." Which, again, this is a man of color who is now part animal, and as a part goat man, this Latino man feels more himself. I think it's also worth noting that every other character who has been changed by the mist has had invisible changes. And so it's weird that Ford is the only one who is physically transforming, and specifically transforming into like a part animal person. Again, he's one of the only people of color in the book. It is a really weird choice to turn one of the only people of color into basically an animal, and then say he's more himself than he's ever been. Anyway, that chapter concludes with Mercury wanting to sleep with Ford, but being worried because what if he has a goat dick? I mean, I guess that's a valid concern. The next chapter, they're supposed to be preparing for a possible attack from Ford and Eva and their men, but they're mostly just like fishing and gardening and enjoying luxuries like rocking chairs. It's just a lot of the chapter is just them doing like preparations and talking a bit about how Gemma's magic has changed. Now she can resurrect dead plants, and also maybe her blood can heal people. And Ford and Mercury have sex. Notably, this is a fade to black scene. So the loving consensual sex in the book is not detailed, but the gratuitous rape is. I just thought that was an interesting choice. There's more stuff at camp. Ford has been flying around, keeping an eye out for Al arriving, which is stupid because he's in the same bird form that he used to attack Al. So Al can see where Ford is circling and know where the camp is. This is literally how he finds where the camp is. For some reason, even though they're on a cliff top, when they see 4 men with guns arriving, everyone flees. And like, sure, get the kids and the elderly and the injured out, because like you need to make sure they're in the safest place possible, and like have a few people go with them to keep them safe. But like, you're on a cliffside and you also have firearms. You have cover and advantage. Why are we running? For some reason, even though they're trying to flee, they have these inflatable rafts like positioned by the river or whatever that's nearby, so that they can, go off down the river if they need to. And for some reason, Ford deflates the rafts as they're before they can escape. But like, why? Like, wouldn't you use those to escape? And like, sure enough, that was a bad idea. They need those rafts. But this is done so that there's an issue with being able to fit everybody on the. I think they had like 3 rafts and he deflated 2 or something. And this is done so that there's an issue being able to fit everyone on the raft, so some people have to swim beside the rafts. And this is done so that Imani can be exposed to the mist again. We get more Al being completely incompetent and unthreatening as a villain, because he fires multiple times on an inflatable raft and can't hit it. It would be so easy to pop this raft. Like, that's all he has to do is get a hole in it, but he just can't. Anyway, Imani ends up getting exposed to the mist again, and Ford, of course, saves her, because Ford is the only one who actually does anything. They escape Al, The next chapter is from Al's perspective. We get a recap of how he found the camp, even though we already knew how he found the camp. And then also a recap of him chasing Mercury as they fled, which again, we already knew. Ford when they were in the river, Ford was able to just with the breath from his lungs blow the mist away. And then now in this chapter, Ford turns into a bird and can flap his wings and blow the mist towards Al and his men, which kills Al's men. Al is upset, and so he's like, I'm gonna go back to my old encampment and get my people from them. And like, this just isn't concerning at all, because he's been so incompetent through the entire book that why would I ever be concerned about him ever posing an actual threat? The next chapter, the characters are recovering from the aftermath of this confrontation. Gemma can heal with absolutely no issue now because she can heal with her blood. So the one drawback she had on her power is gone, because like she had a limitation on what she could heal because she like took on their pain. But now that's not an issue. We also have no sense of urgency because Stella is like, I know Al won't be back tomorrow, so we can relax. So that's great. They know they have time to set up and they don't have to rush, and everything's fine. We learn a little bit more about Imani's gift, but like it continues to be very vague and nebulous. Like after 3 exposures, she still has just like, I don't super know what her power is. She got a prophecy and she can will an oasis into existence and she can talk to plants. What is her power? Anyway, that's basically all that happens in that chapter. Also, there's been this ongoing background subplot of Stella and Marcus are falling in love, but like neither of them are actual characters, so I don't care. The next chapter is just not a lot happening. We learn that Jenny has been spending a lot of time with Tyler being the teenager who's only 18. Jenny is 25. So, and also Jenny is a high school teacher. So once again, fucking inappropriate and uncomfortable. And then at the end of the chapter, they finally start setting up battlements and getting ready to defend their camp. The next chapter, Ford warns them that danger is coming. Al shows up with his men. They have a grenade launcher, but they don't shoot at the people trying to invade their camp because shooting people with grenade launchers is bad or something. This is when we start getting into, there's been an idea that has been suggested in the book but not really explored, and that is that the old gods have awakened and are trying to restore balance to the world, and that is why the mist started killing men. It was the old gods retaliating against how corrupt and evil men are. And the idea is that they need to like let go of the old ways and embrace a more earthy and holistic and loving way of, you know, walking the earth kind of thing. And like, that's fine, but it was not built up or established well enough for it to feel like a through line in this book. So the next chapter involves the characters, a handful of the main characters making some sort of declaration about their power and then pouring water down a cliff. I believe it's water mixed with a little bit of their blood. This then kicks off into the actual fight. I'm trying to remember. Oh, I think the water they poured down the cliff had a bit of their blood in it, and it made all these like vines and plants and stuff grow out, and it attacked a bunch of the people with, you know, grenade launchers and stuff, which raises the question, so it wasn't the killing that was the problem, it was the firearms. But like, they're dead either way. Anyway, this is now the boss fight, so to say. Eva can now fly, and Al can ascend a sheer cliff face. These abilities never appeared anywhere previously in text, they just showed up now. The swarm of mosquitoes is somehow just absolutely wrecking all of the people in this camp. They're on the ground being killed by a swarm of mosquitoes. They defeat Eva with a bundle of herbs, basically like citronella and stuff, which conceptually is fine. It's like, oh, she has been changed by the mist to essentially be a, you know, the human embodiment of this bug. So we kill her or the way we would kill this bug, and that's fine. Except Eva's blood kills plants, and herbs are plants. So presumably she could just bleed a little and this wouldn't work, but I don't know. She doesn't think to do that, I guess. Al, also, his leeches are trying to kill everyone, and they kill him with salt because he is now an embodiment of leeches, which again conceptually is fine, but I wish there had been more like build up to this. I wish they had done more as villains. If there had been more confrontations where Eva and or Al actually accomplished something, bested our heroes in some way, I would have felt more invested. Like if they'd tried to fight them and could not figure out a way to overcome them, and now in this scene they've figured it out, that would feel like a triumph. But here it's just kind of like, oh yeah, I guess salt works, sure.
Editing Rachel here with a pitch. When Al originally shows up to the camp, instead of them fleeing and him chasing them and being unable to pop their inflatable raft, he attacks the camp. Maybe he's already brought his people with, weapons and stuff. And he attacks the camp and they are trying to fight him off. Maybe he just attacks, maybe it's just him and Eva and they attack the camp with their bugs and stuff. And the women are trying to fight them off, but they can't, and so they flee. And this confrontation that's happening now, this sort of final battle, instead of it being them high up in their camp, defending their camp with, not actually a whole lot of issue, and it ends up feeling very anticlimactic and the solution comes out of nowhere. Instead, it's them triumphantly returning to their camp and reclaiming it and taking it back. And this is the moment where they figure out how to overcome Al and Eva's twisted powers. That would have been a much more satisfying conclusion.
We have the final chapter of the book. The Earth Mother Gaia figure just destroys all the guns. I guess you're not allowed to use firearms even for hunting. Sure. That's not much else happens. The book ends. They have this like thorn wall around their camp now, and I think one of the last things that happens in the book is a woman arrives from Madras seeking sanctuary, and they let her in. This book was a lot and also nothing. Again, as I said in my previous discussion of Into the Mist, I really, really feel like what PC Cast should have written is a cozy, not cozy fantasy, cozy apocalypse. All the stuff with the characters, foraging and getting their colorful clay and making all their bricks and going scavenging in town and talking about their dreams and all the pretty outfits and the face paint and the dancing, like that would have been totally fine. That would have been a fine book, and I think it would have served an interesting niche. The problem is again, it's trying to deal with these like high stakes and triggering subjects and really heavy topics, but it doesn't engage with them with enough care and nuance for it to land. So it ends up feeling really ill-considered and poorly balanced and like honestly kind of harmful and offensive. And I feel like if PC Cast had instead leaned into making an idyllic society out of ruin and just celebrating sisterhood and women and levity and making the best of the worst situation, I think this would have been a much better book. And honestly, I don't know how much I would have personally enjoyed it because I probably would have gotten bored, but I think I would have appreciated it more than this book, because it never felt like the big things that this book was trying to do, it never felt like the book really cared about. Al and Eva are a prime example of this, where for all the presence they had in this book, there's multiple chapters from their perspective, but they're never doing anything. And nothing of consequence ever happens to our main characters because of the machinations of Al and Eva. And so either the book needed to lean more heavily into that as an ongoing problem, or it needed to scrap that entirely and just let this be a more, cozy story. I even would have been okay if, cut Al, because that's just such a ridiculous fucking character and subplot, and it doesn't make any sense, and it breaks the world building, because what do you mean that in the name of balance, the old gods resurrected Al and made him more evil and powerful? What do you mean? The reason the old gods awakened was because of how evil and powerful men were. I digress. But if Al had been scrapped, but Eva and Sanctuary Town continued to exist, if Madras continued to exist, that could have worked as almost a foil to what Mercury and her friends were doing. And maybe some of that conflict could have been Eva fearing that she would lose her site of control and her reputation as a sanctuary where she can bring more people into her cult. Again, going back to the vision I had for what the Madras could have been when I was talking about Into the Mist. And if she was concerned about losing that, and, you know, Mercury and her group kind of, from her perspective, seizing more power by setting up their own little town, or like building their own community, that could have been an interesting conflict, and that could have been an interesting villain for them to face off against. But it didn't need, like, it shouldn't have been the way this was, because like the conclusion of the story being guns are evil and we need to destroy them feels so weird, because there's been so many instances across this duology of the characters being proud of their proficiency in firearms, and there being no challenge or question to that, there being no guilt or consequences from using firearms, and now suddenly, well, no, we can't use firearms at all, firearms are bad and evil, we can't have firearms, we have to do something else. And I don't know, it just feels just ill-considered, and again, it is 3 books stapled together, but none of them were ever fully realized or fleshed out or even thought of in depth. I just, someone tell PC Cast to write a cozy apocalypse, because I think she could do it. I think in general PC Cast would be better suited to cozies. Having read many of her books, a lot of them, the sections that she seems to enjoy writing the most, based on how much detail and length she goes into, seems to be the scenes of mysticism and coziness. And that's totally fine. Just write that. Because what we actually got was not good, and in fact very offensive. Again, there was ableism in this book. There was lots of completely gratuitous racism. There was a gratuitous rape scene. There was just a complete failure to understand how gender and queerness works. And just overall, like, not a good book. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the final book in the Into the Mist duology. I don't think I did an emoji for the first book, but if you liked this book, or not liked this book, whoa, if you watched this far and you like this video, please leave some sort of Dawn-related emoji in the comments, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!